This definitely is related to race, ethnicity, and class, and brings racism as the most controversial aspect of Lovecraft's work. Lovecraft did not seem to hold all white people in high regard, but rather he held English people and persons of English descent above all others. This does not detract from his ability to create compelling philosophical works which have inspired many artists and readers. Reading Lovecraft's work, his racial attitude may be seen as more cultural than biological, showing sympathy to others who assimilate into the Western culture, a very similar position to the one I've shown during the classes, if I may add. The risk of a scientific era, especially at the turn of the 20th century, is another common theme. Man increased in his reliance upon science, was both opening new worlds and solidifying the manners by which one could understand them. Lovecraft portrays this potential for a growing gap of men's understanding of the universe as a potential for horror. Indeed, at a time when men viewed science as limitless and powerful, Lovecraft imagined alternative potential and fearful outcomes. Non-Euclidean geometry is the mathematical language and background of Einstein's general theory of relativity, and Lovecraft references it repeatedly in exploring alien archaeology. These lead us to religion, in which Lovecraft works are ruled by several distinct pantheons of deities, actually aliens who are worshipped by humans as deity, a very close theory to the ones shown in Ancient Aliens in History Channel or channels alike. And these deities are indifferent or actively hostile to humanity. Lovecraft's actual philosophy has been termed cosmic indifferentism, and this is expressed in his fiction. Several of Lovecraft's stories of the Old Ones, alien beings of the Cthulhu, pardon if that's not the pronunciation, mythos, propose alternate mythic human origins in contrast to those found in the creation stories of existing religions, expanding on a new natural worldview. To talk about the influences on Lovecraft, it is necessary to mention some very big names in literature. Some of Lovecraft's work was inspired by his own nightmares. His interest started from his childhood days when his grandfather would tell him gothic horror stories. His biggest influence was Edgar Allan Poe, because both lost their fathers at a young age, loved poetry, and used archaisms in their writing. They both went against the contemporary styles and created their own worlds of fantasy. In the case of Allan Poe, in a more romantic way; in the case of Lovecraft, in a more space-headed way, but both make it with a undeniable mastery. Arthur Machen carefully constructed tales concerning the survival of ancient evil into modern times in an otherwise realistic world, and his beliefs in hidden mysteries which lay behind reality was also a source very important in the construction of this cosmic desidia towards the human desire. as well in the case of Oswald Spengler and Robert W. Chambers. Same thing happens with Algernon or Blackwood. Another inspiration came from a completely different source, which is the scientific progresses in biology, astronomy, geology, and physics. His study of science contributed to Lovecraft's view of the human race as an insignificant, powerless, and doomed race in a materialistic and mechanistic universe. Lovecraft's materialistic views led him to espouse his philosophical views throughout his fiction. These philosophical views came to be called Cosmicism. Cosmicism took on a dark tone with his creation of what is today often called as the culthood mythos. He did, however, correspond regularly with other contemporary writers, such as Carl Ashton Smith and Auguste Derleth, people who became good friends of his even though they never met in person. This group of writers became known as the Lovecraft Cycle, since they all freely borrowed elements of Lovecraft stories, the mysterious books with disturbing names, the Necronomicon, my favorite one, the pantheon of ancient aliens entity and eldritch places, for use in their own works with Lovecraft's encouragement. Although Lovecraft is known mostly for his work of weird fiction, the bulk of his writing consists of voluminous letters about a variety of topics from weird fiction and art criticism to politics and history. This made him the most prolific epistolar writer after Sartre, which is a very big thing. And this also leads somehow to group Lovecraft fiction into three categories by some critics. The first one of which is the macabre stories, which is tend to see from 1905 to 1920. The Dream Circle stories comes after, in between 1920 and 1927, and is closed by the culthood mythos or Lovecraft mythos stories, which goes approximately from 1925 to 1935, more or less. Going back to the epistolar work, he sometimes dated his letters 200 years before the current date, which sending him back to the colonial times of US or before the American Revolution, which was a war very personal for him because of his Anglophilia. He explained that the 18th and 20th centuries were the best in terms of the more clear division and imposition of the Western culture in pretty much every sense of culture and everyday life in America. Lovecraft clearly states that his contact to numerous different people through letter writing was one of the main factors in broadening his view of the world, and this can be also seen as the source of his influence in modern culture. In my case, because of my personal taste for music, I've seen Lovecraft fictional mythos being an influence of many musicians. For example, the rock band Metallica, Black Sabbath, the melodic death metal band Black Dahlia Murder, the progressive metal band Dream Theater, as well as the Darkest of the High Seat Tickets band, psychedelic rock, and some other bands which I consider not necessary to mention, have a very strong influence in their aesthetic, in their writing, in the content of the lyrics, going so far like the case of Cradle of Filth, which dedicated a whole album to the, let's say, lyrics they produce under the influence of having just read Lovecraft's works. And this can be felt in own flesh, going to these references, which are mainly YouTube links to different songs from different bands, in which you can experiment the second effects of reading Lovecraft. The first URL is the address of a fans website created only on Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this was wide enough on the topic. Thank you very much.